Ivan Pavlenko, From Family to Family, Chapter 1, Part 6.2, Youth and Further Education, read by Natalia Buzova. On the second day, I went to Poltava to study as a land surveyor. I was enrolled in the first course, but there was no place in the dormitory. They settled me in a private apartment, which was paid for by the technical school. At first, I lived at number 7 Paris Commune Street with the Kaplunovs, Jews. It seems to me that they were poor people. The apartment consisted of 2 rooms, one of which they rented out to students. There were 4 of us. The owner's name was Lazar. He was lean and thin, with a black forelock and a crooked nose. Dressed poorly, traded at a stall with some goods. The landlady Rosa was red-haired, stout, and worked at a sewing factory. Their son Misha studied at a construction institute and was a sociable boy. Once I got a discount ticket to the theater and there was nothing to wear, so he gave me his pants. The fact that they crammed into one room while the other was rented out to students testified to poverty and perhaps also to the thriftiness characteristic of Jews. We had a good relationship with them. The owner liked to talk and joke with us. More than once there were conversations about Jews, about their fate and place in society. Once, the owner said the following: "We Jews are disliked, accused of being cunning, living at the expense of others. So the very conditions of our existence often pushed us to this. My people are forever persecuted. So when a child is born to us, the first thing we teach him is a warning. Look, son, in both directions. You can be insulted, beaten, slandered, because you are a Jew. That is why we develop immunity in our children's protection, so that they grow up smart, careful, ready to fight for the right to life in their own way." I agree with the fact that the persecution of Jews always took part in our Ukraine, both during the Tsarist and Soviet regimes. Let us recall Gogol's Yankel from the story Taras Bulba, who is threatened with danger at every step because, in the eyes of the Zaporozhians, he is a damn Jew. And the Black Hundred and Petlura pogroms, obviously, that is why we, as school children, made our contribution to the relations with the Jewish children. The Jew is drab, puffy with shit, poured with milk in order not to be angry. This is how we annoyed the Jewish children, because our grandmothers taught that the Jews had crucified Jesus Christ. I believe that inciting inter-ethnic enmity has not benefited any people, but only forced those Jews to be more cunning in the interest of self-defense and not yet kinder to those who despise them. What are the sources of anti-Semitism, and on what basis are those who can consciously or unconsciously preach it or follow it in their lives? This problem is very old, entrenched and complex, and therefore persistent. The first statement stems from the belief that the Jews crucified Christ and that they contrast their own Jewish religion with the Christian religion. We will not say whether the crucifixion was real or just a canonized legend, but the entire Jewish people cannot be held responsible for the act of Judas, just as the entire Georgian people cannot be held responsible for Stalin's terror. The second accusation is that Jews are allegedly waiting for a Messiah who will lead them out of civil position and will give power over all the peoples of the world. They say that Hitler hated them for this because he himself aspired to world domination. He also hated communist doctrine, considering it a product of world Jewry, since its so co-authors were Jews: Karl Marx, Karl Liebknecht, Karl Kautsky, Rosa Luxemburg, Trotsky, Zinoviev, Kamenev. But it must be admitted that Jews were brutally persecuted in Russia. Therefore, they were in the first ranks of the October Revolution, and after its victory, almost all the leading core of the party and the state consisted of Jews. In the magazine Young Art for the 1989, I found interesting information about the specific weight of Jews in the state apparatus. In the first years of Soviet power, there were 77% of them in the People's Committee of the People's Commissariat, 76 in the Military Commissariat, 80 in Finance, 81 in the Foreign Affairs Commissariat, 88 in the Labor Commissariat, 95 in Justice, and 95 in Punitive Borders, Cheka and KVD, 91%. These last numbers are especially scary when we remember the Leninist, Stalinist repressions and those executioners who conducted and fabricated confessions in prison casemates and were the heads of camps with repressed people. Now let's take education. In 1980, for every 1,000 people of the population of the Soviet Union, there were Ukrainians 52, Azerbaijanis 53, Russians 74, Armenians 125, and Jews 434. That is almost every second person had a higher education. I believe that the given data in no way compromises Jews. On the contrary, these people, humiliated in the past, accumulated such potential for self-defense, which provided many of their representatives with a leading role in the 1970 revolution and commanding heights in the state. And the fact that most Jews have higher education only confirms their mental ability, stubbornness, and persistence in achieving their goals. We, Ivans, often see nothing beyond the chained bottle. Therefore, unfortunately, we perform the most accessible mission of a working horse or an ox or even a stupid ram. I understand that to generalize even mass signs of the degradation of society means to slander the entire nation. But drunkenness and debauchery have reached catastrophic proportions in our country, and our grandfathers and great-grandfathers were decent, hardworking, and sober-minded. But the Stalinist dictatorship has mutilated us so much that many of our positive national qualities have been destroyed and lost. And instead of trying to reason, we scold the cunning Jews who don't drink and live better and more beautiful than us. And it would not hurt us to adopt something from them, in particular, their national consciousness and mutual benefit, business acumen and accuracy in entrepreneurship, skills to get out of any situation with ingenuity. Famous monarchist Shulgin, in his book Days, writes about Jews like this. We don't like the fact that you took too much part in the revolution, which turned out to be the greatest deceit and forgery. We do not like the fact that you were the backbone of the Communist Party. We do not like the fact that with your organization and cohesion, with your perseverance and will, you have strengthened for many years the craziest and most bloody enterprise that mankind has known since the creation of the world. What we don't like is that this terrible story was played out on the Russian back, and it cost us Russians untold losses. We do not like the fact that you Jews, being a relatively small group in the Russian population, took part in the aforementioned heinous deed inappropriately. We do not like the fact that you have actually become our masters. We do not like the fact that having become masters, you turned out to be masters far from merciful. If you remember what we were like with you when the power was in our hands, compared with what you Jews are like with us, the difference is amazing. Under your rule, Russia has become a country of silent slaves who are unable to gnaw even their own chains. You complain that there were Jewish pogroms during our rule. They seem like children's toys in front of the all-Russian debacles that you caused during the 11 years of your rule. And you are still asking what we don't like about you, sorry. Those who experienced the first post-revolutionary era, which was largely the era of the triumph of the Jewish nation, cannot agree with such conclusions. But Stalin did not want to share power with them. And at the end of his rule, they turned into outcasts again. The case of Jewish doctors was fabricated, and during Khrushchev's time, restrictions were imposed on admission to universities and party-run state positions. Poltava is a beautiful city. In summer, it drowns in greenery. Only in the central park of the city, there are 6 parks. Корпусный, Луначарский, Челюскинцис, Березовый, Korolenko, Petrovsky. The entrance to the park, named after Lunacharsky, was not free because the orchestra always played there, and the most crowded and accessible was Korpusny Park. In its center, there was the Monument of Glory in honor of the victory over the Swedes in 1709. There were comfortable benches with bags along the asphalt alleys. Many young people strolled, met, and fell in love there. Young people did not walk barefoot as we did in the village, but were wearing boots or shoes. The most common canvas shoes were cheap. They could be renewed with tooth powder. City boys always also differed from village boys in their clothes. The pants were ironed, and we had pants like pipes. Walking along the sidewalks, we sometimes had behind us the insulting word roosters, that is countrymen. So it was necessary to change the form, but we could not afford it. I studied well and received a scholarship, even when it was necessary to have 2/3 of the grades 5 and 4. But it was only enough for the vouchers I took for a month's breakfast and lunch at the technical school canteen. Sometimes 10 or 20 rubles was sent from home. For the most part, my parents sent parcels with food, a lump of butter, dried fruits, and regular mother's gingerbread. It was hard, and I was often hungry. Sometimes I wanted to go to the cinema, eat ice cream. At first, I really missed the village. At night, our Yashniki party boys and girls, and of course Marusia, to whom I wrote letters, but she did not answer, although she promised to write, were in my dreams. It was my first failed love, later stirred up and buried by the war. And then I was worried and wrote, as I think, a good poem, translated here from Ukrainian into English. It's raining in the blue sky. The cloud bird is white. So far is my beloved, so far is my sweet. The breeze stirs beveled grass, with the cloud dreams fly over Poltava. Autumn has already arrived. The clothes are colorful. Why doesn't the postman bring me news? Gradually, I entered the normal city life. I befriended fellow student Vasil Harris from Kotelna. One day, when we completely ran out of money and food, we went on a day off on foot to Kotelna to his parents. The distance was 60 kilometers. We drove a little, clinging to lorries, and walked more. We barely got there, tired and hungry, but it was good to eat and sleep. On the second day, having gathered food, we set off on the return journey. We went to Opishna on horseback and then on foot. We arrived in Poltava in the evening and, tired, fell into bed. Although my studies were going well, I soon realized that the profession of a land surveyor was not for me. Almost all the main subjects, geodesy, cartography, trigonometry, algebra, drawing, were mathematical, dry, and I loved literature, history, and read books that corresponded to my age characteristics. They were Turgenev's Noble Nest, Princess Mary by Lermontov, Resurrection by Tolstoy, Pomegranate Bracelet by Kuprin, Letter from a Stranger by Zweig, Queen Margot by Dumas, Ho by Panas Mirny, Red and Black by Stendhal, Madame Bovary by Flaubert, and others. Under the influence of fiction, I began to change for the better. The boys were wandering around the city at weekends, and I stayed at home with a good book. I was fond of poetry. I liked some poems by Saussure, Rilsky, Bloch, Heine. I found motives in them and that touched me as well. As you know, in schools at that time, all those poems were studied in which the same thing was repeated in different versions, the praise of the party and the glory of Stalin. But such poetry did not reach my heart. And when I started reading myself, the true beauty of the poetic word was revealed to me in individual poems. I remember how Volodymyr Saussure's poem Cornflowers struck me. Cornflowers in the field, cornflowers in the field, and you, dear, have cornflowers from under your eyelashes. And the grooves turn blue in the field of vision, and there's blue happiness in my soul. The years move like clouds above us, and just like that, too, we'll walk in the field, but we won't be there. Maybe we will become flowers. Maybe you and I will become cornflowers. The field will turn blue just like now, and clouds will fly in an unknown time. And the other one, distant, full of greetings, will compare us with dear eyes. I also started composing rhyming lines, mostly lyrical and intimate. Some of them remain in my memory until now, but I will not waste paper on them because they are not perfect and very personal. A whole newspaper was published in the technical school, and I began to write patriotic poems for it for the October holidays, May Day. The teacher of the Ukrainian language and literature corrected them and blessed them with the next newspaper issue. Later, I joined the editorial board, and in my second year, I was already the editor of the newspaper. In the village, I was friends with Mykola Berezhny, Marusia's cousin, and through him, I learned that she had a lieutenant in the army whom she was going to marry. Then, in 1940-41, after the news from Mykola Berezhny, I walked around as if nailed from the corner and poured out what was hatting my soul into rhyming lines. I will write down one of the poems in these memories, but not all of it, only the parts that I remember. I walk at a leisurely, quiet pace, without a goal, without a goal, without thoughts. The city sleeps, and the street is white with snow. It was not the first time that storms predicted for us mournful songs about separation. The blizzard still subsided to change into the sun of spring. These dusts will also fly away once, and spring will come to the city again. But you won't come, my dear, my first betrayed love. In Yashniki, as well as throughout Ukraine, the approach of war with Germany was already felt. The mobilization of all men under the age of 35 began. They were taken for training, retraining, but no one came back. And the word war was on everybody's lips. My father took me to Yuskivsky station by a horse cart for the last time. We took a travel ticket. The train came. We said goodbye at the train wagon. Anxiety was visible in the eyes of the father. According to family tradition, we did not kiss, only shook hands. Good luck to you, said the father sadly in parting. I never saw him again. Missing on the Zhytomyr direction, such a message was received by the mother in 1944. During the 2 years of my studies at the technical school, significant changes took place in the country and in the public consciousness. New plants and factories were put into operation. Domestic cars appeared in cities and villages. The shops were filled with various goods. Wages also increased little by little. People began to live better, more cheerfully. This became especially noticeable after the experienced famine. Workers and peasants began to believe that their troubles were behind them, and now the way to a happy life was opening. And they lived, fulfilled, and exceeded 5-year plans and overscheduled tasks. And those who expressed doubt or dissatisfaction imperceptibly disappeared, were announced enemies of the people, agents of foreign intelligence, members of an underground terrorist organization. And we believed they were really enemies. Official propaganda advertised unprecedented, often inflated, false labor successes, records, and feats. Everything was subordinated to the education of the Soviet Stalin's patriotism, press, radio, cinema, fiction, and art. Only ideological songs were heard from the stage, glorifying Stalin, the Communist Party, the Red Army, and a happy life. Films with a similar content were also shown. Considerable attention was paid to instilling hatred of class enemies in the younger generation and in as a whole to the entire bourgeois world. Newspapers wrote about the hard life of workers abroad. Various spies and saboteurs were shown in movies. About fascism, especially Hitler personally, as well as the Japanese imperialists who pursued an aggressive policy against the Soviet Union. Patriotic euphoria especially fascinated young people. Mayakovsky's saying communism is the youth of the world and the young people have to build it became popular. And we believed it in and were proud of our historical mission as builders of a classless society. Each of us dreamed of becoming some kind of a hero, a border guard, a pilot, a sailor. This euphoria captured me too. I was no longer satisfied with the profession of the land surveyor, with endless numbers, formulas, and drawings. I dreamed about the heroic Red Army, about lieutenant cubes on buttonholes and a commander's uniform.